First of all, welcome to all the panelists. And I'm also very glad to see that biotechnology session is before the IIT session in Bangalore. That's not normally the case. We usually get stuck at the bottom of the schedule. Also, the good thing here is that I think there's definitely now traction for biotechnology. Many years ago, when we started, I was at Biocon for many years, part of the original group that started Biocon. We were always looked at very quizzically. Okay, what are these guys up to? Or where is the scam? Kuch to hai. So it's now reached a point where there is a very clear momentum in this whole industry segment, and we are finding that there is a lot of interest from the investment community, from the industry, as well as a lot of Indian-led innovation. So today we have a very eclectic panel. We have professors from academia, we have academia entrepreneurs, as well as people from industry. So we will really look forward to hearing from them what is it that they feel, and also Dr.Syed Kazmi, who is not an IIT alumni, but he's in drug discovery and he's based in the US. So just to very briefly set the stage, largely speaking, biotechnology is about bioindustrial, biopharmaceuticals, bioinformatics, and there's a lot of talk about red, white, blue, and green biotechnology, which is green is agri-biotech. So we would like to hear from the panel today what they think is the state of the industry, the state of research, and where are the gaps that they feel that where Indian industry or India could push the envelope as far as the knowledge is concerned, as well as make impactful research which can be translated into maybe industry. So we have a real good startup culture in biotechnology in Bangalore and in the rest of the country, and I think this would be a very good opportunity from the panel, what they feel is the state of the industry. So we'll start from Professor Balaraman. He needs no introduction, as Ashok said. Everything is in this, but just to briefly let you know that he is. He's a Padma Bhushan awardee, which is as well as a former director of an Institute of Science. He's done some very seminal work in peptides, which is actually an area of tremendous interest to the industry. So, Professor Balaraman.
I might just begin by making a comment on what Ajay said. Biotechnology has always been the poor relative of information technology in Bangalore. And there are many reasons for this, but an interesting point of information is that, Claude Shannon's PhD thesis was to build a framework for theoretical genetics. So I think there was a fundamental connect between biotechnology and information technology even at birth. And I think in more recent times, we've underestimated the timescales on which biotechnology advances can be commercialized in India, and also the kind of system in which startups began to function maybe 15 or 20 years ago was not quite ideal. Today, I think things have changed dramatically. I think biotechnology's future in India is going to lie in the hands of the startups which have evolved. I think Vijay Chandru was very early on, but I think at that time, I don't think conditions were quite as favorable as they are today. I think as far as startups are concerned, I think if biotechnology startups are to do well, they need a longer time period in which they have a greater financial cushion available to them. Information technology startup gestation periods are significantly shorter than biotechnology startups. And the two areas in which biotechnology is really going to be applied, one is in medicine and the other is in agriculture, the requirements are completely different. Now, there was a mention about green biotechnology. I think anything in agri-biotechnology will have to be green. There will be many political and social problems by which biotechnology advances cannot be used in agriculture. But there are green approaches which are emerging, and I think they need a great deal of support. Biotechnology startups, I think, require, in my view, but I may be prejudiced in this, I think they require a much greater intellectual input and for a much longer period of time. There needs to be a much closer integration of academic researchers and the researchers who are pushing biotechnology. But I think the scenario looks very promising.
I think that's very well put. The gestation period, the reason why biotechnology has been, you need a lot of patient capital. And it's also, unlike IT, and I speak from experience, a very bricks and mortar business. You actually have to have a very serious infrastructure to be able to do quality work and then translate into either product or services. So there is, the services part is little less asset heavy, but the product part is actually very asset heavy. So it's very well put, very well said by Professor Balaraman. Now I'd like to hear from Professor Mayor, who is the head of NCBS, a leading institute in the country, the most leading institute in biotechnology in the country. Your views, sir.
Sure. I want to follow up on what Balaram just said. And also give us somewhat of a twist to biotechnology as an area of sort of explosive impact. Because I see, both biology and biotechnology both as problems that are entirely and intrinsically interdisciplinary. I mean, they are problems. They are not like sort of something like chemistry or physics, or they're not disciplines per se, but they're problems. And I think this is where I see biotechnology in some ways being a integrator of all the knowledge that we have in all the different disciplines of science. And therefore, I think the extraordinary opportunity that we have today, I mean, I'm just sort of leapfrogging on what Balaram says, accepting everything that he says, which I don't usually do, but say that the IITs here, and I speak from somewhat of a checkered experience in IIT Bombay, the IITs here have an incredible role to play, because IITs are one place where all the natural sciences disciplines are present in one place, in one location, often extremely siloed. But today, if we open up those silos and engage with questions in biology and biotechnology, the opportunity for our students who are going through this system is going to be unparalleled, because these are extraordinarily bright people, and if one can seed questions in the industry of biotechnology and also questions in biology as problems that can be addressed by, say, electrical engineers or computer scientists or chemical engineers, the future is sort of unbelievably bright.
So how's NCBS positioned to assist in that?
So NCBS is a fundamental research-oriented space, where if you look at our faculty, I should say we are not just NCBS at the north end of Bangalore. We are the National Center for Biological Science, the Institute for Stem Cell Science and Regenerative Medicine, a DBT enterprise, and a startup incubator, Center for Cell and Molecular Platform, CCAMP, which I think today is one of the country's perhaps most successful startup incubator ecosystems here. And the focus of these three places are somewhat distinct. NCBS is, as I said, fundamental research. And our faculty, 50% of them or more, are not traditional biologists. They're all, in fact, many of them from the IITs. So that's in some ways just a testimony to that, to the fact that research in biology is necessarily interdisciplinary. Secondly, I think it's very hard to push innovation and technology from an individual researcher's laboratory. And so the institute that's next door to NCBS, the Stem Cell Institute, which is in some ways also a problem in biology, about developmental biology, we have teams of researchers working on problems that are coming from the biomedical aspect, but equally one could have teams of researchers working on problems that are connected to agriculture. But they're sort of team-driven. And then finally, the ideas from the campus and from other parts of the country are nucleated and incubated at CCAM. So that's the ecosystem that we have built right now. It is, at this moment, an exciting space, but I think it does rely a huge amount on public support. And this is where I think the challenge lies today, that the public support is vanishing rapidly.
Yeah. Dr. Kazmi, he is the president of Jubilant Therapeutics, based in the US, correct?
Yes.
So he's had a long history of associating with industry and big pharma and biopharma. So we'd like to hear from him what he sees could be something that, where are the challenges and where are the gaps which could be identified by startups based in India and marry them with industry.
Right. First of all, thanks very much for the invite. I must say I'm not from IIT, but I do have a very strong connection to IIT. Back when I was doing PhD, I visited IIT Kharagpur to explore a potential research collaboration. And I met a student there, and she gave me a tour of the campus, wonderful. And I'm happily married to that tour guide for 30 years. So I am in the business of human therapeutics, right? And of course, we talk about growth, we talk about value. But a higher metric in pharma industry that we use as our North Star is how many lives can we impact or even save? So when I go out and talk about cross-industry collaborations, it is really the idea is what you can bring to the table from high tech, as I call it, to solve some of the problems and make some of these transformative medicine a reality for patients who need it. So every pharma is trying to develop transformative medicine that they want to get to the market twice as fast and to twice as many patients. And there are a number of areas where we see IITs and high techs, all the brain trusts that can help. And I've been in this industry for 30 years, and I feel very passionate about helping patients. So in terms of needs and gaps, there are many areas where we could still do better. I mean, just one, if you look at drug development, it's a very long and costly business. It takes over 10 years and over $2 billion to bring a medicine to patients to market. And when we screen hundreds of thousands, these days millions of compounds, and out of that, less than 5% advance to the next stage. So we are talking 95+% failure rate. And from that preclinical stage, an overwhelming number of those compounds fail when we take it to the clinic. So these days, There are a lot of companies in US that are using AI-based virtual screening platforms and algorithms. And at Jubilant Therapeutics, we are working with one such company to screen millions of compounds in the time it takes you to drink a Starbucks coffee or any other coffee. So what we can do in terms of automating, computational biology and marrying that to the first step of drug development. The second is really identifying the right patients. And you have huge patient databases where we can look at the phenotype and genotype and look for which drugs would work in which patient population for specific genetic mutations. And for example, one of the programs we are working on right now is in a form of leukemia that's called amyloid leukemia, acute myeloid leukemia. Now, our targets work in select patient populations that have certain mutations. So a company in Philadelphia is helping us to precisely identify those patients where these drugs will have the maximum benefit so we can identify and include them in our clinical trial programs. The third is, how do we make the clinical trials more efficient and bring the virtual clinical trial experience to home along the patient journey. So there are companies now, I'm sure they may be here in India, I've been in US for too long, where a company like Science 37 and others that are developing this network-oriented platforms where patients can virtually enroll in the trial, and then the physicians or the clinical trial investigators can monitor their progress, and patients feel more part of the process. So it's really speed of patient enrollment, it's really reducing patient drop-offs and non-compliance. Then the list go on. In the biotech manufacturing, I'm working at Amgen and Novartis. We have seen a number of innovations coming from high tech that has really helped us to improve efficiency, improve quality, and reduce failure rate. Another very important area that you look at is how can we bring the digital health, the new healthcare technologies beyond the pill to enhance customer experience, to really monitor their progress during therapy. And a lot of that is happening even in India to increase compliance. To improve patient monitoring. And I think it's still at the smaller scale to top tier cities, whether it's in India and other parts of the world. And the challenge is how do we scale it to rest of the markets, especially in India where remote areas don't have the same privilege of access to healthcare as big cities. So one idea is for Indian startup ecosystem and everywhere to partner with large pharma companies who have the global reach. I mean, there is a technology giant in China called Tencent, and that partnered with Novartis, one of the top pharma companies and my previous employer, to develop an online disease management program to monitor heart failure patients. And that sort of partnership really goes a long way to ultimately meet the goal of where we all want to be in terms of helping patients. And finally, I think for Indian startup ecosystem, I think my suggestion is not necessarily follow what the developing countries are doing for their local markets. I think there's no need for everybody to work in oncology when development countries have a ton of resources. Let's look at what is unique about India and what is unique about Indian ecosystem and how the high tech and biotech can come together. I mean, the tropical diseases, you hear all about corona these days. I mean, tropical countries are prone to these kinds of epidemics. And we have in India a huge database of these types of, viral and bacterial infection patients that other parts of the world do not have. To leverage that sort of database and opportunity to develop next generation antivirals or antibacteria that many other developed countries are really not paying attention to.
Right.
So it's really a grand reward, for the grand work. So those are some of my high-level thoughts.
Okay, I'm sure there'll be questions, and some of them will be from me, but thank you very much. Vijay, he needs no introduction. He's the founder of STEM Life Sciences. Strand Life Sciences. And I would like to hear his views on what, being an academic entrepreneur, he's made that transition very well. So we want to hear his views on what needs to be done.
So I think Professor Sudhir Jain actually said something about bringing in academics mid-career and how that can sort of ruin the culture of an institution. So Professor Siena Rao, who had moved mid-career to Indian Institute of Science, then brought me in, and I think I introduced the dark side to the Indian Institute of Science. So hopefully, it's not viewed in a pejorative way, but I think back in 1999, when we approached the council of the Indian Institute of Science, we actually used this quote from the Maharaja of Mysore, who, while laying the cornerstone of ISC, said, Mysore will, I feel sure, reap a reward for the liberality of Her Highness, the Maharani Regent's government, by having at her doors a university which will teach her sons and daughters, I've added daughters, to increase the material wealth of their country. Right? So I think this was the quote we used when we approached the council, and Strand has been around for now 20 years. I think I would like to pick up a little bit on Uday's comment about thought leaders, right? In some ways, Strand is a very unique experiment, started by computer scientists who came into biology and actually, have had impact now all the way to the clinical aspects of application. And that is actually a unique experiment in the world. I don't know of any other company that has made that transition from a foundation in computer science and data science all the way to the clinic. I think, as Professor Balaram pointed out, I think if you overlay the history of technologies and go from, say, World War II onwards, molecular biology and computer science actually are very concurrent. And there was, that was what appealed to us intellectually to say, why shouldn't we create the next crossing, of these two disciplines that had been developing. And I think, if you look at impact, the tools that Strand has built today has probably about close to 30,000 citations in literature. We have impacted sort of how research biology actually looks at high throughput experimental data and analyzes it. And of course, in terms of the impact on precision medicine, I think that is already playing out through our 20 labs and a couple of million tests that we do every year for patients all over the country. Right. So I think, probably Strand is a good example of how we might think of thought leadership going through translation, finally commercialization all the way, right? Very happy to have been part of that journey. I've, of course, retired from Strand as an executive, and I'm back at the Institute.
So what would you do next?
Right. Exactly.
Or what do you think should be done next?
Good question. So I think basically what I see is, first of all, I would like to point out that the guy from SAP was a bit off, right? It's not that, biotechnology is where IT was in the 80s and 90s. If you actually look at the two technology laws that have reached exponential scale and have reached the second half of the chessboard, Moore's law did that in 2006, 48 years into its implementation or its validation. And genomics entered the second half of the chessboard, that is 2 to the 32 times acceleration in 2017, right? So what is called Flatley's law, genomics law, is moving at the square of Moore's law. So it's actually much faster than Moore's law. So the impact is huge.
Absolutely.
And I think precision medicine and early detection of disorders, including cancer, using liquid biopsies and by looking at trace tumor mutations in blood, saliva, urine, we are going to see lots of impact in precision medicine. But there is a third wave of therapeutics, and that's where I'm heading. I think, we heard Dr. Kirmani talk about small molecules and what small molecules have done. And of course, India has played a huge role in generics and small molecules for the world. The second wave is probably biologics, and Biocon and Anthem and several other players now have shown that India can be an important contributor to biosimilars, biobetters, etc. The third wave is genomic medicine. And Goldman Sachs has identified this sector as a $4.8 trillion sector. Of course, there are various aspects to genomic medicine. There are the antisense oligotherapies, there's gene therapies, there's CAR T.
So personalized medicine.
It is a little bit more than personalized medicine. It's actually individualized medicine.
Right.
And I think the problem is that for many of these disorders right now, business models for an India-based outfit is not very clear. Mm-hmm. So the way I'm approaching it is through a nonprofit foundation, where we will take the first steps and then figure out how to take it forward from there.
Thank you, Vijay. Suresh Madhavan is founder of CrossPoint. PointCross. So I'm getting my
investment company.
Right. So let's hear from him what he thinks should be the way forward.
Right. So the context in which we are in biotech, is 9 or 10 years. We pivoted into biotech. We came in from oil and gas exploration, and my background is in mechanical engineering, and our team in Bangalore, which is very key to our company, had skills in any subject other than biotech or biology. But we decided to go in there. And we decided that we would make products. And we decided that we would, and not services. And we went to the biggest pharma companies and the FDA. And there was a little bit of, being brash and being able to say, we think we can solve a problem that they may not have even tried to understand how to solve. And they believed us, and we are in business. So the big changes that I saw and we saw were that there was a complete alignment between how the software products are being developed and biological products are going to get developed. There's no difference other than 2 bits in computer science and 4 bits in the biology side. We didn't see much of a difference there. And so we started developing our approach to precision medicine from that. And we work with some of the biggest companies as well as biotechs now. And what we found is that In addition to the Flatley's law that he just mentioned, there is also tremendous changes which I think are very encouraging for Indian entrepreneurs coming up. And that is, it actually started with a talk that Atul Bhutte, who is a translational researcher and a cancer researcher at Stanford, gave at BioIT a few years ago. And he was showing how a number of changes had happened that allows two kids in a garage to start a biotech. You can design your molecule on the computer, you can order it, it gets shipped to a lab where a discovery assay can be run or multiple assays can be run. You can order the cell lines, you can get the results. You send the results and the request to the labs that do the in vivo animal studies, you do the safety studies, the results come, and they're still in their pajamas in their garage. And all the way that process can be taken to your IND submission and approval for first in human. And it is at that time that there are already in the US, there are quite a lot of markets where, the in-licensing, out-licensing discussion can happen, and you can start getting funding from pharma companies. And the pharma companies have outsourced all this. Yeah. They are depending on biotechs. So this is a tremendous opportunity because today they can play in that game, and what's happening is that the last of the barriers are being broken down. So the assets that you just mentioned earlier, those assets are not required to be in-house anymore. So if you want to do a clinical trial, you do the normal thing, you spend $1 billion on a phase 3 trial, but that's changing. Yeah. Verily, for example, from Google, and many other companies are now experimenting with virtual trials where you recruit virtually because of the precision, what you call targeting and stratification that you can do with the biomarkers, the molecular biomarkers, and real-world data. You know which patients you want to pre-select.
So, Suresh, for the benefit of our audience, yeah, very briefly, what's precision medicine? Because I'm pretty sure people will be wondering what it is.
So when we talk about small molecules generally, we are looking at a molecule that goes into the human body, triggers certain mechanism, pathways that cause certain changes, that cause other changes, sometimes multiple pathways, and finally the disease target, is attacked. With precision medicine, you tend to be usually more in the biologic side, but you are looking at the very specific pathways that you want to trigger. You may go even deeper and look at specific proteins which are a result of your genome, of course, and you're looking at making modifications to that or make changes to that. What it means is that you're designing drugs not for the population. To give you an idea, till about 10 years ago, the typical blockbuster drug worked about 30 to 40% of the patients. That's it. The rest of it, sometimes, and most of it, it didn't work. Plavix is an example. It only works on 45 or 50% of the patients. The rest of it doesn't work. Today, you're making drugs where the probability of it working is almost 90 or 100% for the patients you select. That means you do companion diagnostics. You first check the patient's genotype, you see if they have the right markers, and then you go and give it. So if you've had any friends or anybody who's suffered breast cancer, you may find out that they had a BRCA1, BRCA2, HER2, mutation, which makes them susceptible to breast cancer. And then drugs like Herceptin, which are very specifically targeted for people with that particular type of mutation, works. That is precision medicine. Individualized medicine is where you really essentially start engineering the molecule in the drug for the patient. And the possibilities for that are happening. You must have heard of CRISPR. It's one of the technologies where you can modify the molecule. It's the gene itself or the protein. The other thing that's happening, which is very big and which Indian entrepreneurs should be looking at, is molecular biomarkers is only one precision, signal that you're looking for. The other one is functional biomarkers. And what's happening is that this little phone that we carry around is capable of connecting to very simple, cheap devices that can measure what's going on. Your gait, your tremors, your lack of attention to your memory, all of these can be picked up. So Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, you can pick up these signals, and you can, and heart, atrial fibrillation, things like that can be picked up with an iWatch now. These things are very important because all of that is software. A kid coming out of college can set up a company and start building that, and they are doing it.
So I think this is an excellent point. What he just said, big pharma is outsourcing a lot of things. You don't need to build those assets. Those exist with companies which will do that for you. However, what it does need is patient capital, because this is still very capital intensive. So, but it's very heartening for startups to know that you don't need to build a lab or a setup. For that, you could use the academia like the InSTEM and CCamp. And also, you don't need to actually own you don't need to be able to do the clinical trials yourself. There are people who would help you. There are companies who you can outsource this to. So that's where the ecosystem is going. So there is actually a very strong possibility of doing startups. What BIRAC has done, and I think I want to point that out, is that they give startup capital at very easy terms or even grants, and they're very patient about it. So I don't see very many young people here, but the message should go out there that there is a great possibility of actually starting the same way that IT companies start, we can start biotech companies as well. So what I would like to ask the panel now to talk about is, for instance, Professor Mayo, can you list?
Maybe you can say 2 minutes about what Anthem Bio does.
Okay. So what Anthem does is exactly what I just was. So we actually are, for many startups, global startups, we are their labs. You need wet labs to validate what they are propositioning or what they're hypothesizing. So these ecosystems where there's a lot of capital available exist in around Harvard, MIT, that is Cambridge area, in San Francisco, San Diego, parts of UK, parts of Germany. So there are people with ideas, but no labs of their own. And they obviously, when they get funded, they need more bang for their buck. So if you go to a geography like India, they can come here and we can provide them more data, more information, complete from concept to filing of IND, because we have the labs. And we are not the only one. There are other companies which are in the same space. And it's been a very successful model. What it also gives us is a front row seat to see how drug discovery is done. And that actually is a lot of capability building. So people, this is how an ecosystem develops. I came out of Biocon. There are other colleagues who went up and started companies. And from our company, some people have already left and started some part where they can service the industry. So I can clearly see an ecosystem developing where we learn about how drugs are developed. And that is exactly what Anthem does. We are now 1,500 employees, 2 sites. And we also see what Big Pharma is doing is they own the IP and they know how to do the regulatory and the clinical studies. Everything in between, they believe, can be outsourced. So you can participate in any part of that whole thing. And I'm specifically talking about healthcare because I know that space, but the same can be done in agri-science because big companies are looking to see exactly where can they, and we do work for agri-science companies, so we are therapy agnostic. In our hands, it's either a biological, and it's a protein, or it's a small molecule. So it doesn't matter whether it is for displays that are used in iPhones, or it is for drug discovery. So we're very agnostic to that. So that's what Anthem does. So if you could list out how many companies transitioned from to C-Camp, and then how many have gone out and actually become thriving enterprises?
Yeah, well, CCAM's 10 years old, and about 120 have been incubated, mentored by that ecosystem. About 12 of them have now literally gone on to get Series A funding. None have gone for IPO so far, but we are hopeful that.
No, but are there some whom you're encouraging to move out of the incubator now?
We have about 3 of them who are about to fly off. So I think but it's, as Balaram was also saying, there's a long gestation period
Yes.
in this game. I mean, it's. But I also wanted to add
Please.
make one more comment. If one talks about India and biotechnology, one does need to have a deep research base. You need to have a deep knowledge base. And today, if we look at the number of people who are doing research in the biological sector in this country, it's perhaps less than the City of London, or less than the few cities around San Francisco. So, I mean, we are incredibly small as a community of researchers, and this is where the knowledge that all the biotech industry needs. This is where the knowledge lies, and I think if you're going to think about scaling up biotechnology in this country to make it an engine of the economy, we have to scale up the research base. There's no alternative. I mean, the reason you're able to do what you're able to do is because you are in a place which is rich of intellectual resource. And I think this is something that we have to keep reminding ourselves that we can't be doing this in the absence of that. And that's one big challenge for the biotech industry today in India. And I think unless we overcome that, and I feel the IITs are a place where we might be able to create that possibility, but we need to build the research infrastructure for that.
So this is where IITs can play a very important role, because as we are hearing that you need it's a lot of different disciplines which have to come together to actually to take something from the lab to the market, especially in biotechnology. So there is some centers of excellence. There is one in Delhi. I know IIT Delhi, which is doing work. But we need to, I'm sure there's biotechnology has been looked at all the IITs, but we need to create a lot of intellectual capital that we can build up there, which can then be, as we partner. And I'm clearly with my experience is that from when I left IIT Delhi to what is happening now, there is a big shift in the way the professors, the way academia is thinking. They are thinking now that they have to be collaborating with industry. Of course, there's a long way to go, and I know this debate is even in the US, they're still having this debate. So we actually have an ecosystem which is now pushing everybody to get involved with industry. So, and we ourselves are, working with IIT Delhi. But yes, I think this is a very good point. Dr. Kazmi, you had mentioned a few things about, high throughput screening. And so if you could, more pointedly tell us where some of this is, of course, if you do high throughput screening, you need it's a very big infrastructure or very expensive equipment and a setup which can do an analysis of that. So what do you think that where, in your view, that the Indian ecosystem can be developed which can participate in this?
I think for some of these newer technologies that will certainly help the drug development process, the key is to continue to grow the industry-academia partnership, which is widespread in development in some other parts of the world, especially US and UK and Germany and France. I mean, to the extent we can leverage academia and then take advantage of the brain capital, but also the infrastructure. So, one thing that comes to mind is when you talk about identifying new targets, there are technologies right now where, and it's called chemoproteomics, for example, chemoinformatics, where you can look at thousands of protein fragments and subject that to specific molecules that are known to impact certain pathways and identify these new targets. That requires, to begin with, a very high resolution NMR, which is a very expensive machine, but premier institutes will have those machines. So you have the idea, you have the roadmap of how you want to get there, and partnering with academia, not just for accessing consultants, but also accessing infrastructure. The second thing is the incubators. You mentioned one. I mean, J&J, when they downsized their discovery research in various cities in the US, they made available hundreds of thousands of square foot of lab space with no strings attached to startups who want to come and utilize the facility for a nominal rent and try to build this idea. J&J, of course, has the first sight of what's going on, but they don't have any rights to anything that comes out. They have to license like Novartis or Amgen or any other company. So incubators are becoming really a big breeding ground for innovations, and fundings are available through government, through large pharma and biotech organizations. So it's really building that partnership will go a long way.
Okay, yeah, this J&J incubator that's in San Diego, they left everything in there,
Yeah.
all the equipment. That's because they closed the site. Fortunately, we don't have such closures because we can ill afford those in this country at this point. We need to generate more jobs. They're seeing how to rationalize costs. So yeah, this is but I think one incubator we have in C Camp. There's also one in Hyderabad, right?
Two here, right?
Which,
There's the one in Electronic City. There's
Oh,
also
the
the
IBAB.
No, the Bangalore Biocluster in the Electronic City, which is, I think, also doing quite well. There's about 30 companies there now who are fully fledged out and on their track somewhere.
So some of these companies have said that it's very expensive to rent these incubators. So is there I know this is all around a very expensive proposition anyway, doing drug discovery or doing developing new products. So is there a way to rationalize those costs so that it becomes more affordable?
Having them linked up to academia is a very viable option. I mean, all resources that are present in academic settings, I mean, both at the ISC and on our cluster are completely available for the incubators. I think the incubators at the other end of Bangalore suffer from the lack of that kind of close presence of these resources. But I must say, for example, at CCamp, in the three companies that have gone on, one is Bugworks with antimicrobials, with AMR, antimicrobial resistant and first-in-class compounds. Another with some stem cell products for a company called iStem, which is now coming in for some stem cell products for eye regeneration. And a third one, C6 Energy, looking at algal biomass for biofertilizers. So there's been a whole range of things and all of them, given their range, all of them have accessed of almost every faculty on our campus for something or the other. So that engagement has been very exciting for both sides, from the academic side and from the industry side. So, and I think if one can have maybe 100 such clusters like what we have built, then we'll have a robust biotech industry that's not just based on one or two unicorns, but
Absolutely.
Will be really thriving.
Vijay would like.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think Jeetu forgot to mention that.
Just take the mic.
That Strand actually used CCamp, right? So there was a point when we were getting into cell biology to actually build a virtual liver. and we used his lab, so it's not just startups. I think the platforms are available, and we were able to go and get started through C-Camp and its facilities, and later that has now, that whole unit has been acquired by Syngene, so it is now running in Syngene as the ADME Tox group that does predictive toxicology. And so, I think while there's a lot of focus on startups, I think, there's also a need to build the ecosystem once the companies are up and running, and how to leverage all these platforms and technologies around.
Professor Balaram.
I might just give real-life examples of how things haven't quite worked out the way they should. You gave the example of the Johnson & Johnson facilities which turned into startups. There was one such here in Bangalore where AstraZeneca had a world-class facility, and AstraZeneca pulled out of India. But I don't think the best efforts of people in Bangalore, including the government of Karnataka, could quite persuade anybody to convert that into an incubator. So we actually had world-class physical infrastructure, which then was completely lost to, this is one. And so real estate development is, I think, somewhat more important than biotechnology incubators. The second thing I might comment is, I think you made the comment about the amount of money that startups have to pay to use these incubators. At the moment, Indian incubators which are set up with central government funds are much more expensive than they should be. And part of the reason is that the government itself creates facilities, but having created facilities puts the onus of earning money on those facilities. And the only way those facilities can earn money is now to act as rental agents, increasing rents. We had the same kind of problem even at the Indian Institute of Science when we set up an incubator there, because there's always this pressure that you must show earnings. And it turns out that on the one hand, BIRAC gives the grant. On the other hand, half the grant goes away for rental charges.
I think that's a very important point from Professor Balaram. Real estate, particularly in all the urban centers where you find talent in India, is so profitable that you have actually, if you were to set up a project, and this I've said this on all forums that I've got a chance to, is that if you were to set up a project, half your cost will go just towards real estate, which is actually very sad. It should actually be a small fraction of your cost. Now, if you have to buy land and building and set it up, or even rent it, you pay a very large part towards that, and that's quite a roadblock in starting a company. So
just to give the U.S. perspective on, it's very disheartening to hear that incubators, startups,
do you want to take that up?
High rent,
yeah.
Because the fundamental, premise for incubators is to provide these facilities to startups who don't have capital to begin with. And in the US, it's widely done with corporate donations and corporate contributions, and a number of pharma companies, and some companies like Google and Apple and Microsoft, they have corporate venture funds, and I managed one for Amgen where we would provide what is called golden ticket, which would come with $1 million, $2 million reward for startups to go and work in the incubators. And the incubators are supported by government, by corporations. And the idea is for J&J and many others, Pfizer has done the same thing, that the rent is really nominal. It's just more for legal purposes than anything else. And all the facilities are free.
So again, this does not exist here yet, but companies are required to now put some money aside for CSR, So we have actually also asked the government that some of this money that we give to incubators and all should be part of CSR. I don't know if that's still yet, but that's not, I think. As of now, it is not. But if we are going to do CSR out of our profits, this could be, if we could put this as an allocation to funding an incubator, where then people can where startups can get nominal rent, and it brings down the cost of having a startup company. So I think this is all work in progress, but I think the good thing is that the government is listening, and slowly but surely we are pushing the government to act. See, what we keep hearing is India wants to be a 100 billion bioeconomy by 2025. Let's not get worry about the numbers. That's a very ambitious number, but it doesn't matter. What we find is that in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been tremendous progress made. And it's right now, what I get the sense is when I talk to people is there is definitely a real momentum now. And this is how everything gets started. Everyone would like to see it go like this, hockey stick, but it doesn't happen like that. That's not real life usually. But at some point when there is inflection, it will go up like that. So we're still waiting, but that will happen, and I'm very, very optimistic about that. So now I think we're doing good on time, so let's throw it open to questions from the audience. So any questions? Yes, sir. Oh, okay.
Hi.
This is our rapporteur.
That's right. I'm also making notes on this, so
Yes.
for
You
future
would like to
things.
say something, Dhananjay?
Yes, I'm Dhananjay. I run a company, a biotech company called Achira Labs out of
I
Bangalore.
think we would like to hear from you what you do a little bit, because that's very point of, yes, you said.
Sure. So we're a medical devices diagnostics company. We talked a lot about pharma, but there are a number of small medical diagnostics device companies also that have been funded through BIRAC. And in fact, 50 lakhs or a crore goes a very long way in the devices world, but not a long way at all in the pharma world. So there have been many devices diagnostics companies started over the last decade, and mine is one of them. We're focusing on point-of-care immunoassay solutions. But I'll get to my question and some comments on all the discussion, which is primarily around the business model. I think if you take the IT analogy, there's a fundamentally driven by cost arbitrage. And maybe the CRO model or doing these kinds of things in India is driven at least partly by that. On the other hand, you have the licensing model where you're saying we'll do innovation in a garage and HSR layout and then eventually license it to Pfizer. And maybe some of you can talk about the challenges of that actually happening. Would somebody accept a molecule that was designed in India, and then how would those people get those multi-million, billion-dollar deals from here? Does that model even work? How do you see it happening? And secondly, are we really restricted to the cost arbitrage models, and should we be focusing a lot more on them for the next 20 years?
Okay, if I may, on that point, it's actually, I think, in my view, getting a garage startup to get their molecule to go to a big pharma is a bit of a stretch at this moment. However, the Indian big pharma, which started as generics company, have done because the generics pipelines are now drying out, so they've actually started putting a lot of money behind discovery. So some of those have transitioned into big pharma. In fact, Lupin has licensed a molecule to Boehringer Ingelheim, where we are also involved now. So we are aware that of some of these deals which have, and in the past, Dr. Reddy's did Glitazar, I think that was what it was called, which was licensed to Novo Nordisk. Obviously, not all these, there's very high failure rate in drug discovery. So there is clearly, and these are not the only two, there are 4 or 5 other molecules like this. So it is happening, but all of them have gone through, because a lot of work has to be done before you get somebody interested in looking at it. And so you need resources for that. So what is called the Indian big pharma has always been involved with that. So maybe the startups can feed into that, and then they can take it further.
There are examples now of startups which have reached the stage where they have a molecule, but they can take them, they've taken the molecule into large-scale production for clinical trials, and they have also managed to gather money to conduct clinical trials. because once you have the molecule, everything after that is outsourced until a complete dossier is prepared. Now, this becomes a business proposition of how much money can you raise in order to get your final dossier prepared to go for FDA approval. Now, if molecules are for superficial use on skin and so on, the sort of conditions are much less stringent than if they are for oral or for intravenous injection. So there are, I think Indian startups are now at the stage where they have their own intellectual property.
Yes.
Whether this is going to work out or not, in the pharmaceutical industry, there is this big valley of death into which everybody falls. And they may well fall into that. But I think it's looking very promising.
So I just want to mention,
Yeah.
I just want to mention two specific examples to instantiate what Balaram just said. I think one is CuraDev, which based in Noida got into cancer immunotherapeutics, and it was a garage to, in fact, they mortgaged their houses to
And that was
get
licensed.
the molecule forward, right? The other is in Bangalore, Aten Porus, Aditya Kulkarni, very bright young chemist from Purdue, who actually developed a new molecule for, I think it was Neyman pigment type C, NPC, which has been licensed for $125 million to a pharmaceutical company. So you're starting to see success stories. And I think you just need a couple of these to ignite the young, innovative minds. Right?
And somebody like Aten Porus gets a lot of their work done with us. So they don't even need to set up the physical infrastructure to do any of this.
And I think one area that would help is, of course, if you're competing in areas, either a small molecule or large molecule, which is very competitive, and a number of companies are already working, next generation kinase inhibitor or next generation, VEGF biosimilar. I think the areas to focus, again, one other idea would be to think about where there is still quite a bit of need of innovation. Companion diagnostics. Now, almost all new oncology medicines are going to be co-launched with companion diagnostic. And there is a big need to develop these mutation-specific companion diagnostic kits. Cell and gene therapy, as for the first time we're hearing the word cure for cancer with CAR-Ts and now next generation allogeneic CAR-Ts, which is off the shelf, natural killer cells. In the gene delivery, innovations are happening, but there's still ways to go. I mean, right now, the few gene therapeutics are in the market for, $500,000 to $2 million cost of therapy. Where we can bring innovation to bring that cost down, identify more efficient viral vectors that will contribute, that can be used by Novartis or J&J of the world to manufacture these gene delivery therapeutics at a lower cost. So those are other ideas where, given all the knowledge and the talent here, that I'm sure the Western world will love to embrace.
Sir.
See, my question was a little different in the sense that this particular, I must admit, this session has been very educative for me. I'm not in the biotech area. See, data. I mean, from what cursory knowledge I have about biotechnology, a lot depends on data. Now, when you do lab experiments, your data is highly limited. Conclusions you draw are very, very limited. Is there any move on sharing of data in one form or the other? Because like what Vijay does, the amount of data he has collected, there is no way IIC Bangalore can collect that magnitude of data. Same thing with others who I mentioned out here. So now, what do we do in this particular domain?
So this whole industry has changed very much. I don't know. Yeah, so the number of registries that have come up and that have been opened up is incredible. Okay, so pretty much every kind of omics, there are registries there. Many of them were funded by governments. We keep talking about what can the Indian government do, what can IITs do. Collecting and putting the data in a trusted registry, curating it and making it available openly is incredibly important. Anonymized patient data, incredibly important. There are hundreds of millions of patient data that's available potentially. And accessing that and putting it into a registry and giving it back means that the kind of therapies that are appropriate for the Indian population suddenly become available. Not only that, some of those can then be accessed by other countries. So that's very important. And for example, tumor cell, the NCI and people like that, they have a lot of registries that are putting on. So focusing on that is really the role that both government as well as institutes can be doing. We don't see that. Think of it as Aadhaar, same kind of scale, but build it that way.
Sure. I think Professor Balaram actually chaired the first discussion meeting on data sharing policy for that DBT had called, this was about maybe 6 months ago, Professor Balaram. So that there's a policy taking shape and including a data center that could actually house such data. Now clearly, something like Strand could not have happened without NCBI, for example, or EBI, which are these, these gifts to that the Western nations have given to the entire scientific community. And the fact that we were able to access all this public data, hone the tools, and then be able to license them and so on. I think, and for India to actually develop its own, I think solutions to many of. So the India Genome Project and several other projects are now being formulated, so that the steps are in the right direction.
Okay, there's a question from that side of the...
I'm just going to add one more point about data, because I think here again there's a unique opportunity in India in particular because of the population and the population structure that exists here. I mean, the genetic structure of our population is actually 1,000 different, or maybe more, different tiny populations, which is unique in terms of the genetic information that's present in literally the genomes of Indians, so or of this South Asian continent. So if we are able to harness that as data and have appropriate ways of accessing them which are open and free, I mean there's an incredible opportunity there for the biotech industry as well, and I think we need to think about this.
All right, there's a question from that side of the room. Are you loud?
Yeah,
Okay, the mic's there.
Hi, I come from a biotechnology background. I come from an NIT. I hope I'm audible?
Yeah.
I think this is true across the board. There's a lot of talent loss at an institute level because somewhere the curriculum is not at pace with what is out in the industry. And I think this is true for top-tier universities across the board. You see students getting into a biotech course and then they get off to your general IT segments, which is prevalent. So what can industry and institutes do collaboratively to stop this loss of talent?
So first thing is you're only using 50% of the talent available. Most companies don't use that many. Yeah. So I said one of the things is that think women. Okay? Our company, at least, we see that our mix has gone to 50% in the management and in technology development. So remember that you have a lot of talent available. The other one is diversity. Don't think about just having biotech people working on one thing. Make sure that you have a lot of diversity and you encourage that if you want to be successful.
So, this is, industry usually would hire people and then have to train them on the job. And that is something that, again, this is a perennial question. There are many institutes who at least the students, then there is obviously gradation among them, but many of the students are very ill prepared for industry. It's not easy to have students industry ready, but there are many programs which exist. There are different academies. There's also BIRAC runs it. So we hire people and we skill them up. These are internships we give, for which even the government is willing to pay us money. So there is a lot of effort being done to skill up the students in the industry. But there's no quick fix solution to this. So I think a lot of the effort has to come from the academia, and then of course designing of courses, where again we with some of the private institutes we got involved and said you need to have this kind of coursework, but then for them to find those teachers is not easy. So it's a very difficult. It is a conundrum which needs. The best way industry has figured out, and this is across the board, is getting in bright people. You need people with the right attitude, and then you can train them. Sushila? We're running out of time, so maybe 2 more questions with quick responses from our side.
It's quite interested to note that BT is a very interdisciplinary area. And I think through the talk, we've got a lot of pointers in terms of where IT, like AI, data science, etc. play. What are some of the other disciplines that are going to be impacting or playing into the BT story? And what do we need to do to build that capability?
I've come back to IISc, and I sit in the bioengineering group, Biosystem Science and Engineering. And it's extraordinary, because we have nanotechnologists, we have mechanical engineers, and we have biologists, and all interacting, working together. And I think biological physics is sort of our driving discipline. So it's actually, the interdisciplinarity is going well beyond just data science and biology.
Also for any of the diagnostic technologies, it's a huge slew of things from microfluidics to miniaturization to nanotechnology. All of these things come together on a platform where the base question may be biological, right? But on the other hand, from the research side, as I was trying to emphasize, biology cannot be studied unless you bring every aspect of everything, including new areas of chemistry and physics that one needs to even build to understand biological systems. So it is intrinsically interdisciplinary from both the technology and the science side.
So for instance, we hire people like food scientists, because we've just talked about health. Okay, there's biochemists, food scientists, people who can understand food chemistry. So there is a I think almost every discipline can be hired by companies which are doing actual work in biotechnology. So I mean, as biotech enterprises.
And very quickly, there are some low-hanging fruits. It's really repurposing existing sensor technology in smartphones, for example. Google and other companies are working on, diagnosing jaundice in babies with the camera. TB cough sound of the TB cough is very different from the normal cough. So diagnosing TB over the phone, it's amazing. There are many opportunities which exist is to repurpose those.
Okay, so we're running out of time. Why don't we have these questions offline with the panelists? I'll have to close the session here. I'm being told by the organizers that this is now time out. So thank you very much to the panelists for a very invigorating session. So.